Gonna get started here. Before I introduce our next speaker, Vitaly, I'll just introduce myself and what I do. So my name is Daniel. I work for Wrangle.io. We are a web and mobile development firm based here in Toronto. Work with companies like Google, Priceline.com, Aldo, Uniqlo. So if you're interested to hear more about that, come talk to me after. My booth is right there. Without further ado, I'll introduce Vitaly. He is the co-founder and COO at StackAdapt. Please give a warm welcome.
Thank you, Daniel. I like to move around the stage. So I was working on this presentation for the past few weeks, and to be honest, I was fairly surprised at how difficult actually it was to answer such a seemingly simple questions. Can machines be creative? And throughout this research, I found myself in so many different rabbit holes where I started questioning my own sanity, my own existence. But at the end, after interviews with our data science team, with talking to my friends, watching numerous videos, I think I finally arrived to an argument that I hope will be at least thought-provoking for you guys, and then maybe it will even inspire you to do your own research. So I'm standing here today as a machine learning enthusiast. I'm not a data scientist. And my goal here today will be really just to convey my enthusiasm about machine learning. And hopefully it'll get carried across. So before we start actually answering the questions of whether machines can be creative, I think it makes sense for us to define what creativity is. So, and if I ask people around the room what creativity is, I wouldn't be surprised if many people will answer something to do with art. And it's a fair point. Usually we hear creativity in the context of creative work or artistic work. So, and if you say a person is creative, that's somebody you would meet maybe in Ossington or Williamsburg. But in my opinion, creativity spans a much broader scope. And it covers a lot more things in it, right? So the way I would prefer to define creativity as really an ability to observe and perceive the world in new ways, ability to build connections and patterns within the concepts from the things that you observe, and actually create an output or generate a solution. And that's how I would prefer to define creativity. And so in the context of this presentation, we'll talk about creativity in the context of solution generation or problem solving. So something that would be really relevant for socioeconomic or political problems, but not so relevant for the topics in art. Even though, in my opinion, you can argue that artists have challenges or problems inside of them, and they use art as a vehicle to basically problem solve for what they're dealing with. So, to summarize, creativity in the way we described it, it's really about making observations, finding connections, and generating solutions. So what we'll do is we'll take a deeper dive into these three components of the definition, and we'll see how humans and machines actually stack up against each other. So the first one, before we actually dive into dissecting these components, I would want to say a few words about the state of human and machine intelligence. I think there's a general trend about anthropomorphizing everything around us. So we assign human-like qualities to inanimate objects or animals, and we define their intelligence based on how close they are to how humans behave. So if we see a turtle that doesn't really have anything to do with humans, they don't really do anything what humans do, we generally assign, well, maybe except Ninja Turtles, but we generally assign them a really low intelligence score. But if we look at, for example, at a chimp who is peeling a banana and using a stick to scratch its back, we think, okay, well, this chimp is really intelligent because it's doing things like a human does. And I think it's not necessarily a fair way of looking at it because humans are not the perfect, or they're not the pinnacle of intelligence. And it all really boils down to how you define what intelligence is. So if you, for example, define intelligence as ability to hide from predators really well or mask yourself into the environment, then potentially this guy would be a lot more intelligent than human. And that's exactly why I don't want to judge intelligence of computers based on things where they're inherently bad at. So for example, empathy or emotions. But instead, if we look at something that computers are really good at, for example, processing and storing and navigating massive amount of data, they're really intelligent and a lot more intelligent than we are. So by that definition, we already have artificial intelligence. It's just different type of intelligence. So let's take a look. Let's go back to the definition of creativity and actually talk a little bit more about these three components. So the first one being observation and perception, right? So how do humans and computers actually stack up? Well, I would say odds are not in our favor. I think we're inherently really bad at processing information. We rely on our senses, like eyes or ears or our hands, to actually process information. And this has not really evolved in the last 10,000 years. And even though we have these opposable thumbs and we can grip things, but we still have to use them to type words on our smartphones. And we still use it the same way we're using it to scratch different notes on a caved wall. So we haven't really gone far in terms of our evolution of how we actually not only observe or absorb information, but also how we express our ideas or our thoughts. So unlike machines, there's no way you can plug a cord into your brain and basically accumulate the wealth of knowledge of the entire civilizations. You primarily rely on your own experiences. You rely on experiences and knowledge that people around you have. So inherently, it's really difficult for you to absorb a lot of information. And not only that, you're actually, like all of us, actually really bad at storing this information. Like, we forget things all the time. What was I talking about? No, just kidding. And unlike machines, we are really bad at storing information. So machines are great at processing information and data. And we knew this because we have surrendered our math abilities to computers or calculators decades ago. But now we see computers starting to enter new frontiers in its evolution. So now we see topics that have historically been reserved to humans, like, for example, vision. Now we see computer vision really radically growing as a field. So now, for example, a computer can recognize a cat, which is pretty amazing. But the question that you asked me is like, well, how is this impressive in comparing to like a 5-year-old who can probably identify cats on pictures way better than any computer can? And it would be a fair point. And the advantage of having computer do it, and the whole premise of machine learning, is really ability to scale your operations. So if you were to ask a 5-year-old to validate billion pictures of cats, all of a sudden it becomes really, really difficult. And even though the margin of error maybe in machines is higher, but the absolute outcome would be an order of magnitude more impactful than asking a 5-year-old to identify cats. This was actually really creepy, looking at so many cats trying to pull billion. I gave up at about 10, and I just copy-pasted them. So because machines are so great at storing and processing so much information, they're just simply dealing with so many more data points for them to be able to make decisions or generate solutions in ways that would be impossible for humans. We typically see everything through almost like a binocular, and we don't really see the full picture. So for computers, the future lies in just being able to see a lot broader picture in comparison to humans. Solution generation. So the final frontier of the definition of creativity, and this is where it gets a little tricky. So I want to show you a video first, and then we can discuss it a little bit more. So in this video, you can see an image of a biped that was created by or generated by a human, and then a machine learning algorithm was given a task to basically have this biped walk as far and as fast as possible. So what it learned over time is that if you throw yourself forward and then just plant your feet right before you fall, you actually can move really far and really fast. So that's something that machine learning was able to learn over the time, which is great. Another example, it's not loading super fast, but another example would be the engineers that created a zombie for a video game that can crawl in a very creepy manner, which is perfect for a video game. So it's loading a little slow, but the whole premise is that instead of telling how the zombie has to carry itself, instead of defining it, okay, you have to use 2 feet like a human, and you have to walk forward, they basically define, okay, you're a zombie, or like you're an entity that has to carry itself from point A to point B, and just find a way to do that. And over the time, this machine learning algorithm spit out a way for the zombie to carry itself from point A to point B in a very creepy manner, where it's using its head as one of its legs, something that would be really great for a video game or a scary movie. It's definitely 18 plus type of video, like very scary. But because it doesn't have concept of what a leg is, it doesn't know how to protect its head from bouncing it on the floor. So it's just learned how to crawl in a really creepy way, which works great for video games, but not something that would maybe work for in any other industry. So how would machine learning or computer intelligence, how could it be applied in solving problems that are more tangible to us? So maybe you look at this photo and you immediately get shivers, because I fly a lot and I hate boarding the airplanes. And machine learning could be applied in helping us figure out a way how to board the planes really efficiently, so that we don't have to stand in line. Maybe your ticket will have a special number in a way, and your arrival to the airport would be really optimized to help you on board really fast. So an answer like this, machine learning would be really great at. But then if you pose a question around, okay, you not only want to speed up the onboarding of passengers, but you also want to maximize number of people that you can board on a plane, and you can arrange the seats however you want. Well, that's where a computer can go really crazy, and it can produce some really strange solutions that, if you would imagine flying like this, you'd probably want to just shoot yourself right away. So seats that are facing each other, or maybe standing seats, it's just awful solutions for the way we see what the flight should be. But to a machine, it doesn't matter. It just spits out random ideas. And if we do involve a human to actually qualify these problems and say, okay, that's a terrible idea, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, over the course of time, through reinforced learning, this machine learning engine will get pretty good at spitting out pretty good ideas of how to actually optimize the onboarding and arrangement of passengers on the plane. But fundamentally, it will have no idea why certain things work and some of them don't. Like for example, a machine will not be able to tell you why this doesn't work, right? It doesn't understand that, well, maybe you need to stretch your legs, and maybe you need an easy access to the bathroom, because we're humans and we need to, we're living organisms. So with all these ideas, at the end of the day, a human has to vet the machine around the quality of the ideas that it spits out. So how does that apply to marketing? I mean, I pretty much have not talked about marketing up until now, and to be honest, it's not necessarily intentional. It's just making an argument it's quite complicated before we dive into marketing. So in the context of marketing, I mean, we already start seeing the same progress happening in the world of advertising and marketing. We start seeing machine learning really being able to pick up on topics that are really relevant to users. It's able to identify patterns within audiences that something that we as humans are just simply cannot identify. And for example, a machine can in the future will likely be spitting out ideas for creative or types of content to potentially influence the purchase behavior. But if, for example, in this case, a computer tells you that image on the right works better because it has bright colors, or it works better because of certain pixels, or like because of certain bright color, you can come to a conclusion that, okay, yeah, maybe brighter images work better in the context of reaching a specific audience. But it will never understand, that maybe a pink hair is an appropriate image, but if a person painted in pink, all of a sudden is not really an appropriate image. So what we'll find ourselves in the context of marketing, we'll see more and more qualification happening around ideas that are being generated by the computer. And so, to be honest, when I started doing research for this presentation, I was cheering for AI because I thought it's already taking the world, and I have to admit that I was wrong. Even though it's getting really sophisticated, it's getting really good at processing and storing a massive amount of data. It's great at processing, finding really interesting patterns within this data, and spitting out a lot of different ideas. What machines inherently for the foreseeable future will not be able to do is actually to qualify these ideas, because machines don't have concept of, they don't understand, they don't have any self-awareness, they don't have any concepts of empathy. So for them to qualify an idea and truly come up with one solution that works really well, at this point in time, it's hard to imagine it working really well. So this is it for me. I'll definitely open up the floor for questions if you guys have any.
So we're going to run a Q&A.
So what does your company do with machine learning?
So our company, at the core of our platform, we're able to pick up on browsing behavior of across around 600 million people, and then we're able to identify kind of what patterns of behaviors they indicate before they, for example, purchase a product. So we're able to work backwards and say, okay, well, before they purchase, they read X and Y articles, and that's what triggered their purchase. And then we can target based on what they read, and take this learning and basically feed it back to discovery of audiences. So we do a lot of machine learning around making sense of around 10 billion data points that we store every day.
Hello? Hey, Vitaly.
Hey.
Question, in terms of empathy, like you talked about, right? So if you look at artificial intelligence and cognitive learning, at what point do you see like an inflection point where machines will be able to start to at least understand empathy?
So I think empathy, and again, I'm more of an evangelist than an expert, but I see empathy as just maybe a secondary step from after self-awareness. It's really hard to empathize with somebody without understanding your own challenges. So since machines don't really understand, their reality, they don't understand that, they're plugged to electricity to work. It's without that self-awareness, it will be really hard for them to become empathetic and build solutions that really work for humans.
So you mentioned, kind of going off the same note, how machines don't necessarily have the same empathy or have the same qualifiers that humans have, like you saw in the zombie video where it uses its head as a leg because it doesn't have the concept of protecting the head. Could that not be an advantage if that was paired with a human, because you have machines who are kind of thinking kind of outside of the typical parameters of human thinking, then you could have a human sort through the ideas and be like, standing up seats don't work, but this one that you came up with that so basically what I'm saying is, could basically just the processing power of machines be kind of utilized and then humans providing empathy?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree that it's a huge value of being able to even spit out a lot of solutions to a problem. It's, for example, in the context of kind of what we do, if you take back, for example, 10 years ago, and if you were to run any advertising campaign, and you would have to go directly approach every individual site, you would have to have a brainstorming session around what kind of images we should have. Maybe a creative director would come up with an idea. You would base it off of a survey or a panel discussion with a sample size of potential target audience. So it's just very unsophisticated the way even currently majority of idea generation actually is done. So I think in the future humans will move further and further towards qualification of ideas, and then machines will be in charge of actually processing all this data and just spitting out a lot of ideas.
Do you think that machines will ever be creative on their own? Like, do you think they'll be able to, like, create their own ideas and things, or do you think humans and machines will become just more intertwined, like they can't be independent?
Well, I guess we already are kind of. It's hard to separate machines and computers, right? Like we use cell phones, which is, you could argue that we're almost like cyborgs, right? If it's not integrated into our brain, but in our palm, we basically have access to the wealth of the entire universe's knowledge, right? So I think, to answer your question of whether I think, machines will evolve to a point where they don't need humans, it's a hard question to answer, and I think a lot of people are trying to. I think it's possible.
Just to follow up on a note that Benjamin asked before. So in the case that where machines can provide you with multiple solutions and then humans would be the one to refine it, would you say that they would be contributing to the concept of creativity based on something like quantity rather than quality?
Yeah, so humans play an integral part in even output of the quality of the output. At the end of the day, if, for example, if you look at the software that, or AI that writes songs or draws pictures, at the end of the day, if you boil down to the very beginning, it learns from songs that were created by humans. So inherently, humans impacting even the way machines understand songs, for example, right? So the more involvement humans have in machine learning, the more sophisticated a specific algorithm, in my opinion, can become.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thanks, everyone.